You've come a long way from when you were just a zygote. You probably don't remember this stage of life because you were only a newly fertilized egg in the first stage of being a unique individual. But think about how much has happened to you since then. You developed and grew, you were born, and now here you are, learning about it all. As a human, you are made up of many trillions of cells, but you weren't always this way. The first major stage of development a zygote goes through to help you reach this great cellular height is called cleavage. This is a rapid cell division that leads to a multicellular embryo. To cleave something is to split or slice it. And this is such an important stage that we've devoted an entire lesson to it. Ready to get started? There are some really important things that happen during cleavage, as well as some processes that are essentially put on hold. The cell is dividing incredibly fast during cleavage, which means that the processes that go along with cell division, such as DNA synthesis, mitosis, and cytokinesis, also occur at rapid-fire speed. But during this time, very few new proteins are made. The embryo also doesn't do much growing in terms of size during cleavage. It stays the same size as the zygote. What happens is that as the cells continue to divide, they divide into smaller and smaller cells instead of just building up into a larger embryo. This makes sense if you think about it. If you cut an apple in half, you have divided the apple into two equal segments. Divide each of those two pieces in half and you now have four. But you don't have four larger pieces, just four pieces that add up to the same size as the original apple. In an embryo, this process continues on and on, with each new cell dividing into smaller cells until a hollow cell ball called a blastula is formed. And inside this ball is a fluid-filled cavity called the blastocele. Unlike our apple, though, which is now just many equal-sized pieces of one apple, each new cell that is formed from division has its own nucleus and is its own independent cell. Just like animals come in all shapes and sizes, so does the cleavage that creates them. There are two main patterns of cleavage to be familiar with: complete and incomplete. Complete cleavage is also called holoblastic cleavage, and incomplete cleavage is called meroblastic cleavage. The type of cleavage depends on how much yolk is present as well as how that yolk is distributed. A cleavage furrow is the indentation at which cleavage begins. Think of a cleavage furrow as being similar to that indentation that appears on your forehead when you furrow your brow. Have you ever tried to cut through the middle of a hard-boiled egg? You might have noticed that it is far easier to cut through the white than the dense yolk in the center. A lot of yolk will lead to incomplete cleavage because the cleavage furrow can't pass through that yolk, while a smaller amount of yolk allows the cleavage furrow to pass through completely. To remember the difference, it might help to think of holoblastic cleavage as cutting through the whole cell. Animals that tend to have complete cleavage are echinoderms, so sea stars, urchins, and the like, flatworms, mammals, and amphibians. These guys don't have a lot of yolk in their eggs. On the other hand, animals that do have a lot of yolk and that have incomplete cleavage are things like fish, reptiles, birds, and even insects. You've learned a lot today about a very early but very important stage in your life. Animal cells undergo something called cleavage, which is the rapid cell division that leads to a multicellular embryo. You started this stage as a zygote, or newly fertilized egg, and ended as a blastula, or hollow cell ball. Depending on what type of animal you are, you would have undergone a different type of cleavage. If you didn't have much yolk, say if you were a mammal, amphibian, or sea star, you would have gone through holoblastic or complete cleavage. The little amount of yolk allows the cleavage furrow to pass through the whole cell. But if you did have a lot of yolk, perhaps you are a bird, reptile, or fish, you would have gone through meroblastic or incomplete cleavage. Having so much yolk would have prevented the cleavage furrow from passing through entirely.